Hey besties, if you've been thinking that Judge Louis Lyman is secretly siding with Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, the past week might change your mind. Because honestly, things have taken a major turn, and not in Blake's favor. For months, Blake's team celebrated a string of early discovery rulings, trying to frame her and her publicist Stephanie Jones as innocent victims, supposedly targeted by Wayfarer Studios, Justin Baldoni, Jennel Abel, and Melissa Nathan. But this week's new rulings? They've flipped that entire narrative. Judge Lyman's recent decisions are giving real credibility to the claims that Jennel Abel was actually the victim, and that her phone and the private messages taken from it are at the center of this entire case. So here's what's going on. Jennel Abel filed what's called a third-party complaint. That means she's essentially saying, if I'm being sued, I'm bringing the real responsible parties into this too. And who did she point the finger at? Stephanie Jones and Jones Works, the PR firm where Abel worked at the time. Her core claim was simple. I was just doing my job. As a PR professional, she says she was working on publicity for Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer Studios, promoting positive press and minimizing negative coverage, exactly what PR teams do every day. Abel argues that she acted entirely under the direction and supervision of her employer, Jones Works. The reason she's being dragged into this lawsuit, she claims, is because Jones Works and Blake Lively colluded to use private data from her phone, which was taken and exploited without her consent. And that, according to Abel, is the real reason she's in this mess. In her complaint, she wrote that she was only named as a defendant because she followed orders from Jones Works. She says her employer's actions, not hers, are what caused this entire situation. And get this, she even claimed that Blake Lively didn't name Jones Works as a defendant on purpose, because the firm allegedly conspired with her to use those stolen communications against Justin Baldoni, Wayfarer Studios, and other former clients. So the big question was, would Judge Lyman buy this argument? Well, Stephanie Jones and her attorneys clearly didn't think so. They told the court that Abel's claims were frivolous and would be thrown out immediately. But that didn't happen. The judge denied every single one of their dismissal requests. And this wasn't just a procedural hiccup, it's huge. It means that the court sees Abel's claims as credible enough to move forward, especially concerning the stolen data, which continues to play a major role in this entire scandal. Remember the Van Zandt sham lawsuit involving that same data? That's still alive too. Judge Lyman is clearly taking this seriously, showing that he doesn't see Blake as the innocent victim her team has tried to portray. Now, the legal reasoning here gets super technical, but I'll break it down in plain English. Abel's lawsuit against Jones Works is built on three main causes of action, the biggest one being statutory indemnification under California Labor Code Section 2802. What that basically means is, if you're sued for something you did as part of your job, your employer has to cover your legal costs and any damages that come out of it. The judge didn't fully rule on that yet. He said he needs more information about which states' laws apply, but he agreed that Abel made a plausible case that Jones Works could be financially responsible for everything. And here's where it gets interesting. If California law applies, Jones Works could end up footing the bill for everything. Abel's legal fees, her damages, even the costs if she loses. If Abel wins, Jones Works still has to reimburse her defense costs. Either way, Jones Works is on the hook. So naturally, Abel's legal team wants California law to apply. Here's how Judge Lyman explained it in his written decision. And I'm paraphrasing, Abel argues that since she acted within the scope of her employment at Jones Works and was carrying out tasks assigned by her employer, Jones Works should be vicariously responsible for her conduct and stand in her place as the defendant. That right there is the textbook definition of implied indemnity, when one party, like an employer, is automatically responsible for the actions of another, like an employee if those actions were done under their direction. The judge went on to say that Abel's complaint clearly alleges she was following orders, doing PR work for clients that Jones Works profited from, and carrying out normal PR duties like managing publicity for Wayfarer Studios and Justin Baldoni. He acknowledged that her claims make it plausible that she wasn't acting out of personal motives, but was instead just doing her job. And because of that, her allegations are strong enough to keep moving forward in court. So what does this mean in plain terms? It means the judge sees Jennel Abel's claims as credible enough to suggest that Jones Works and possibly Blake Lively's own team could have been directly involved in misusing that stolen data. And that's devastating for Blake's side. For months, her team painted this picture of a giant PR conspiracy against her, But this ruling shows that the court doesn't necessarily believe that version of events. Instead, it's starting to look like Blake's allies might have been manipulating the situation behind the scenes. So to sum up, Judge Lyman denied Stephanie Jones's motion to dismiss. The stolen data issue remains central to the case. Jennel Abel's argument that she was just doing her PR job is moving forward. And most importantly, the judge isn't treating Blake as the only victim anymore. In fact, this might be the biggest setback for Blake Lively in this entire legal battle so far. What started as a lawsuit meant to protect her image might now be unraveling her credibility piece by piece. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think this changes everything? Because honestly, besties, it's starting to look like Blake's legal strategy is falling apart right in front of her. In light of everything that's come out, the judge has made some very interesting observations about the case. First, he acknowledges that Abel was indeed an employee of JonesWorks, a company operating in the field of public relations and publications, while Wayfarer was the client. That setup makes it reasonable to infer that JonesWorks itself isn't the direct defendant here. For whatever reason, the lawsuit didn't name JonesWorks as a party. Instead, it's only Jennel Abel, an employee from JonesWorks, who was sued. No one else from the firm, despite their involvement. Stephanie Jones, the head of JonesWorks, had tried to argue that the claims couldn't apply to her company because, according to her, Abel had gone rogue. She said Abel's actions were outside the scope of her job, that the company had objected to what Abel was doing, and that Abel had been plotting to leave the firm and sabotage her. Jones painted Abel's conduct as deliberate and malicious, but the judge didn't buy that at all. That's a major development. It signals that the judge is beginning to see the picture Wayfarer has been describing all along, that the true source of wrongdoing here wasn't Wayfarer itself, or even Blake Lively, but rather Stephanie Jones and the choices she made. According to Wayfarer, this entire situation only spiraled out of control after Jones accessed private content from one of her employees' phones, something she had no legal right to do. Under California law, an employer can physically retain a company-issued phone, but that doesn't give them permission to dig into private data on it. The proper process would have been to factory reset the phone and clear it completely. Instead, Jones reportedly went through the device, extracting data she wasn't authorized to access. That's exactly what Judge Lyman flagged in his ruling. He noted that if those allegations are true, Jones could be legally liable for violating California's computer access laws. He also pointed out that Abel's claims against JonesWorks were sufficiently detailed and plausible, meaning the case against her can move forward. What's even more significant is how the judge views intent. He seems to agree that Abel may not have acted with any malicious purpose, regardless of what certain screenshots might suggest. The court is beginning to separate her actions from the broader conspiracy narrative that Jones has been pushing. Another critical point in the ruling relates to one of Wayfarer's central claims, that Stephanie Jones was actually the person who ignited the entire public scandal. After a truce had already been reached with Leslie Sloan and everyone had agreed to keep things professional for the sake of the project, Jones allegedly went off script. Against Wayfarer's wishes, she went to the Daily Mail and unleashed the media storm that continues to rage today. In other words, she acted independently and against direct instructions. Judge Lyman recognized that Abel's allegations, that JonesWorks' actions contributed to Blake Lively's claimed injuries, are the same actions for which Abel herself is being sued. Because both allegedly played a role in causing the same harm, the court ruled that Abel has a valid cause of action for contribution. That means if Abel ends up being held liable, JonesWorks could share responsibility for the damages. JonesWorks' defense, that it owed no independent duty to Blake Lively, doesn't hold up in the judge's view. He basically reasoned that if JonesWorks didn't have any direct duty to Lively, then neither did Abel, since neither of them had a contract with her. Therefore, if damages are eventually awarded, they could be split between the two, under the concept of shared liability. Finally, Judge Lyman addressed the question of common law indemnity, which falls under New York law. In simple terms, he stated that if Abel's actions were carried out under the direction of JonesWorks, then JonesWorks would be responsible for reimbursing any damages and legal fees Abel incurs. That's a massive legal turning point, one that shifts much of the potential blame and financial risk back toward JonesWorks, and possibly opens the door for even deeper scrutiny of how this case began in the first place. In a complex and fast-evolving legal battle, new filings have drawn Blake Lively, her longtime publicity firm JonesWorks, and former associate Jennel Abel into a dispute that's quietly setting off alarms in both entertainment and corporate legal circles. What began as a disagreement over professional duties and alleged data misuse has escalated into a layered confrontation involving indemnity claims, contribution arguments, and allegations that could ripple far beyond a single celebrity's legal troubles. At the center of the dispute lies a critical question: who bears responsibility when a publicity campaign crosses into legally gray territory? And more importantly, if Lively's team prevails on certain motions, who will ultimately pay the price? 3 avenues of liability. The court's recent discussions have revolved around 3 key legal mechanisms: common law indemnity, statutory indemnification under California Labor Code Paragraph 2802, and contribution between potentially liable parties. Each path offers a different route to financial responsibility, and for Lively and her team, the outcomes could not be more consequential. According to legal analysts following the case, if Abel is found liable in any way for actions carried out under the direction or within the scope of Jones Works, and if she successfully proves common law indemnity, Jones Works could be obligated to shoulder the financial consequences of any judgment against her. This would mean that anything done by Abel as part of her professional responsibilities for Jones Works could rebound onto the company itself. However, as lawyers are quick to note, indemnity does not extend to covering legal fees or shifting the entire litigation burden unless the claimant wins on specific grounds. In other words, Jones Works only pays if Blake wins. And that's where the stakes multiply. The second and arguably more explosive path lies under California Labor Code Paragraph 2802, which requires employers to reimburse employees for expenses incurred in the course of their work. If Abel is classified as having been under Jones Works' direction and control during the disputed period, that section could render the company fully liable for her defense and damages, effectively making Jones Works pay for everything. The third potential outcome involves contribution, which means that if both Abel and Jones Works are deemed partially at fault, the company would owe its proportional share of damages. These overlapping possibilities have left Jones Works, a once quiet power player in Hollywood PR, in a precarious position. Every potential outcome links the firm closer to the core allegations. What it means for Blake Lively. From a reputational and strategic standpoint, none of these options bode well for Blake Lively. Legal observers note that tying Jones Works directly to the alleged misconduct undermines her broader narrative of being a victim of malicious intent. Lively's filings have repeatedly emphasized that the actions taken against her, from leaked data to alleged collusion, were driven by personal and professional animosity. But if the evidence shows that Jones Works directed or controlled the conduct in question, the foundation of that argument begins to crumble. Wayfair, one of the opposing parties, has maintained all along that Jones Works played a guiding role in shaping the communications and decisions that fueled the dispute. Should that claim hold in court, it could reposition Lively not as a target of misconduct, but as a beneficiary of it. The judge's comments and procedural decisions in recent hearings suggest a growing skepticism toward the innocent victim framing. Instead, the court appears to view the matter as a tangled professional fallout where lines of responsibility were blurred between employer, contractor, and client. Reevaluating intent and conduct. At the heart of the matter lies Abel's intent. Lively's legal team contends that Abel acted maliciously, driven by personal motives and a desire to retaliate against Lively and her associates. Yet, as the judge has pointed out, Abel's own filings depict a very different picture. They assert that any actions she took were simply part of her professional obligations, managing publicity, minimizing negative press, and promoting favorable narratives on behalf of her client. If the jury accepts that Abel was simply doing her job, not engaging in personal vendettas, that subtle distinction could dismantle much of Lively's case. It would also open the door to a broader re-examination of Jones Works' internal oversight and its relationship with celebrity clients. In legal terms, this is a shift from intentional wrongdoing to professional responsibility. And if the court views Abel's behavior as the latter, then any resulting harm might legally trace back to Jones Works, not to Abel personally. The emerging picture: Jones Works under scrutiny. The inclusion of Jones Works as a third-party entity rather than a direct defendant is, on its face, a procedural choice. But for those reading between the lines, it sends a strong message. The firm remains under judicial observation. The fact that Jones Works continues to appear in the filings, and that its internal decision-making is being dissected, creates an optics problem for everyone connected. Legal experts note that jurors tend to ask intuitive questions. If the company was directing the work, why isn't it being sued directly? Why is the blame falling on individual employees instead of the organization that authorized the conduct? Those questions, once raised in a courtroom, can shift perception dramatically. The more the case continues, the more it threatens to transform from a dispute about one publicist's conduct into a broader indictment of an entire PR culture, one where clients and agencies blur ethical and professional boundaries in pursuit of control over public narratives. A judge paying attention observers who have followed the docket closely argue that the presiding judge has taken a notably active role in understanding the case's complexity. References to prior rulings, including those in related matters such as the Van Zandt proceedings, show a judicial awareness of the patterns at play. Rather than viewing each motion in isolation, the court appears to be building a coherent picture of interconnected conduct, one that potentially implicates multiple actors across different cases. That development is deeply concerning for Lively's legal team. Each time the court draws a connection between these proceedings and prior controversies, it chips away at the perception that Lively's legal troubles are isolated incidents. Instead, a broader theme is emerging, one of strategic coordination, selective disclosure, and reputational management gone wrong. Why the optics are dangerous. Even if Lively avoids direct financial liability, the narrative damage is already substantial. Publicly, the suggestion that she may have benefited from or even coordinated with parties accused of wrongdoing undercuts the emotional appeal that has driven her public defense. For months, Lively's camp has framed her as a creative professional wronged by corporate manipulation and media hostility. But if jurors and observers begin to see her as an active participant, or as someone who profited from Jones' work as actions, her credibility could erode quickly. This perception problem is not limited to public opinion. In litigation, credibility equals leverage. A client whose testimony appears selective or self-serving can find their settlement options narrowing fast. For Lively, that means that every procedural loss or unfavorable ruling carries compound consequences, not just in court, but in Hollywood's boardrooms and public imagination. The settlement pressure on Jones' works. If Jones' works ultimately faces exposure under Prior 2802 or through indemnity, the financial pressure could become immense. Legal sources point out that the firm's insurance coverage might not extend to willful or intentional acts, which means a negative judgment could have to be paid out of pocket. That reality could drive Jones' works toward early settlement talks, potentially in coordination with Lively's team. The logic is simple. The longer the case drags on, the greater the reputational and financial damage to all parties involved. If the firm believes it could be portrayed as having stolen data, colluded, or violated confidentiality, its business relationships with other A-list clients could be jeopardized overnight. And therein lies the quiet strategic tension. Lively may not want to settle, hoping to clear her name entirely, while Jones' works may be desperate to cut losses and close the book. That divergence of interest can strain even long-standing professional alliances. A case that tests Hollywood's legal playbook. The Lively Jones' works Abel dispute underscores an increasingly common phenomenon in entertainment law, the collapse of the firewall between celebrity clients and their hired experts. Once, publicists, lawyers, and management teams operated behind the scenes, insulated from direct legal exposure. But as digital communication, data sharing, and reputation management become more intertwined, those boundaries have eroded. Today, when a publicist handles confidential data or coordinates messaging campaigns across multiple platforms, they leave an extensive digital footprint, one that can later serve as evidence in discovery. The allegations that stolen data was exploited for PR or legal leverage elevate this case from routine litigation into a potentially precedent-setting event. The broader industry impact for Hollywood PR agencies, the implications are sobering.